Reading's a beautiful hobby, perhaps my favorite, and there's no shortage of recommendations on the internet for what books to read, for what subject, what books will change your perspective on this, that, and the other. And I think that's great to a degree, but we have maybe 75, 85 good years on this earth, and we don't spend all our life reading, so you have to really decide what to read, and more than that, why you're going to read it. And being a 26-year-old man, I know there's a ton of recommendations out there for what my demographic should be reading. There's a bit of bias in a lot of these lists out there. So I thought I'd take some time today to go through the books that form the bedrock of my operating system that I use to go through life, and I think that it's done me pretty well so far. The first book that I really think changed the way I see the world altogether was Skin in the Game by Nassim Taleb. Now, Nassim Taleb is a somewhat controversial figure nowadays, but at the time that I first read this book, probably when I was 23 or 24, relatively late, or relatively recently, all things considered. But, I think a good litmus test for when you're going through life is honing your bullshit detector, as he says, such that you can really see why someone's trying to convince you of something, what their end goals are, and you can tell how serious or how much weight you should assign to someone's opinion based on their degree of skin in the game. I know there's a lot of statistical information in this book as well, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but if you take one thing from this book, which is kind of the biggest thing I took from it, is you really need to weigh someone's wisdom by their experience and not by their credentials. So, there's a bunch of memes going around now of who would you trust to run your country, the Romanian taxi driver that immigrated here 10 years ago, or a PhD in economics that's worked at the World Economic Forum. And, most people say the Romanian taxi driver, and I would be inclined to agree. Very much a skin in the game sentiment for sure. The second book on my list is Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. There's a ton of books out there, just a sheer cacophony of information that's hurled at people about ethics and morality and things like that nowadays. It's honestly nauseating. And I think that this book, it's the oldest book on this list by far, really cuts to the core of it. And instead of teaching you what morality is, it gives you a framework that you can appraise your moral decisions from moment to moment. So the biggest thing from this book for me is just the way that it looks at virtues on a continuum. So there's a mean about every virtue. An example of one of these continuums is courage. So there's a continuum. At one end, there's cowardice. At the other end, there's rashness. Courage is in the middle. And depending on the circumstances, what is courageous in one circumstance could be rash in another. And I think that just by sheer reading this book, almost osmosis, I would say, just for lack of a better term, you start to understand how to apply this framework to many different settings and many different issues in life. And so for that reason, I think that this book is a must read, especially when you're in your early adult life. The next book on my list is one that's really, really applicable nowadays. I mean, the internet has just gotten this completely out of control. And this book is The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. I think that if we lived in a world where there was no internet, 95% of people would fall in the just trying to live life and not have my politics get in the way of that camp. And I think that's what most people are. But what this book does, and what I really appreciate about this book, is it's a very skin in the game forward book. At the time that he wrote this book, he was a relatively, left-leaning professor. At the time of the book, he went into it with that mindset, and as he conducted his study, he admits in the book openly, very, very transparently, that his mind started to change. He was looking for a way to kind of own the conservatives when he set out, he admits, but then through the course of his years of research and study, he began to really see the full picture. And, I, as a conservative, started to see the inverse of that, like instead of seeing people as just crazy, I see that there's a moral matrix that everyone operates from, and it helps you to have not only compassion for people that feel differently from you, but it also helps you to have some space. So when there's people making very sweeping pronouncements about how you should or shouldn't think about something, you're able to really dissect where they're coming from. You can very clearly see in almost any political argument from any side the moral matrices that they're really pulling on to make that argument. And it helps you build your own political bullshit detector, to reference skin in the game once more. Keeping the political theme, I think that this book I've done a review of already on my channel, but I think this book is a fiction work that really helps drive home some of what I've talked about in the previous two books, and that is Devils by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So what this book does is it shows you a dramatization of what happens when there is political ideal detached from moral grounding. So in Russia, that was the Orthodox Christian faith. A big theme of this book is nihilism and socialism combining together among young people, and how that really negatively affected one small town, but how it's kind of an allegory for, it was a predictive allegory, turns out, for kind of how the Russian Revolution began and spread throughout Russia. I think this book is really an awesome dramatization of just what happens when ideology takes over the entire rail line and operates the steam engine free from any other holds. It's a really good dramatization of what happens if you let ideology take the reins and not share it with any other type of moral or ethical or just, decision analysis sentiments. So I think this is an awesome book for that purpose. Another fiction book that I found really telling, especially in the world nowadays, is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And the reason I think that is because obviously one of the major themes of Blood Meridian is violence. But, you can abstract that up to force in general. Force in today's world doesn't have to be Judge Holden throwing a puppy off a bridge. Force in today's world is actually probably more akin to just information overload about a topic. It's probably more akin to the moral whitewashing of subject from one that incorporates and encourages nuance and discussion to something that's black and white, and then that blackness or whiteness completely overpowers all nuance. I think that force is an enormous player in today's world, and it's shaping a lot of the things around us. And I think that if you can read this book and you can understand how the spirit of Judge Holden's force kind of captures many of the characters in this book, or how the spirit of Glanton's just morally absent, leadership or lack thereof, if you will, captures all of the tertiary and side characters in this book, you can understand how certain ideas or certain spirits, maybe the spirit of productivity, maybe the spirit of political activism, maybe the spirit of, online incelism can capture people. And I think that it'll help you provide, create some distance between those ideas that might grip at you, especially at this critical juncture in our lives. The next book I want to recommend, it has a ton of relevancy in today's world. Finance is something that a lot of people either claim to know a lot about but don't, or people are scared of and shy away from. And I think that the reason I'm going to recommend this book as something you should incorporate into your operating system is because it gives you a good slate to begin from. So The Tao of Capital by Mark Spitznagel. Austrian economics it's a crime against humanity that it's not more widely taught and espoused in education systems, but I believe that's probably by design, not to put on my Alex Jones hat. But what this book does is it gives you the first several chapters. It doesn't even talk about investing at all. It talks about the Austrian economic model of thinking, and it helps you to understand that as opposed to just a bunch of levers that you move, like a lot of modern economic theory that we're taught and a lot of monetary theory that we're taught, it teaches you how to see the world as almost like a series of forces. You'll see some common threads through these books that I'm recommending here. So just like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the one who usually wins, if it's two purple belts rolling, the one who wins is the one who maintains his composure and waits for the opponent to overextend himself such that he provides an opening for the one who's conserved his energy and kind of held on his laurels to take advantage of that weakness. So that's pretty much the Austrian outlook on investing, on capital. And I think that that's an outlook that if you can incorporate into your financial life, you will be significantly better off than 90% of your peers. You know, like the S&P is higher than it's ever been. Bitcoin's higher than it's ever been today, literally. And, you know, there's a lot of people just pouring money into these things. They think number go up infinity, and it's just simply not true. I think this is one of those times where you need to be the purple belt on his back, kind of in half guard, just letting the craziness of the world thrash about you and just wait for your opening. So my second to last book that I want to recommend is a book on religion. So I'm still, figuring it out. I'm Christian. I grew up in a Protestant Christian household, and I'm, like many men my age, wrestling with, what sort of expression of Christianity is right for me and my wife and our family that we're going to be having down the road. And the book that I'm recommending here is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. A lot of the issues that he addresses in society at the time of writing this book are still relevant today. I mean, we have, the science versus religion debate more lively than ever. I think that he wrote this book kind of as an inquirer into Christianity. I could be getting my timelines mixed up, but it's a very logical, humorous, and just straightforward breakdown of the what and the why of Christianity. And I think that it's very, very relevant for today's world. And I think that everyone, regardless of your expression of Christianity, should read this book because it'll help you see some things in a new light and help you to consider some things you may not have considered before. Last up here, I have another Taleb book. As you can see, I put a lot of value on the authors in the books that teach you how to think and teach you what to watch out for as opposed to what exactly to do. And so, probably no surprise here, but my last recommendation is Antifragile by Nassim Taleb. I think that the beauty of this book is he doesn't tell you, put your money here, or do this or do that. What he does is he tells you why you should build your life and the systems in your life in such a manner that on the absolute worst day of your life, you will not be subject to catastrophic destruction. I think that fragility as a concept is just genius because so many of our systems and things and just items in our life in general are so fragile. Look at modern cars, for example. In 1999, a Ford F-150 was, naturally aspirated. You could fix it in your own garage. It was actually designed such that you could do that. And the everything was mechanical inside the vehicle. Maybe you had an automatic transmission, maybe you didn't. But nowadays, you shift to 2025, even the speedometer is digital. Everything in there is controlled by an engine control module. All it takes is, one electronic failure, one software failure somewhere in that vehicle, and this big $70,000 piece of machinery is useless because you can't even fix the engine control module on the side of the road. You have to get towed and have someone else do it. That is the definition of fragility. And that is an allegory for many other things in our life. You can't build a life that has fragility at critical junctures, be it financial, be it in your relationships, be it in your health. And I think that this book, beyond being a statistical polemic, which I love Taleb's polemics, honestly, if someone's going to go on one, it should be him. But yeah, it just gives you a new way to view your life from a distance. You can look through all of the major pillars of your life and examine, am I fragile here? Am I fragile here? Am I fragile here? And if so, what can I do to fix it based on some of the other books I've recommended? So that's 8 books that I find to be the most impactful in terms of how I view and live my life today. I have by no means made it, but I think that I'm in a much more stable yet positionally advantaged state of life than I would have been had I not, read those books that I just mentioned and incorporated key parts of them into my life. I think that I am healthy. I think that I am financially stable, and I think that I have my finances set in such a way that if a black swan type economic event were to occur, rather than get completely washed away with the flood, I would be positioned to perhaps take advantage and plant new trees in the rubble much more quickly than those who are not. I think that emotionally and in my relationships, I think that I am much more forgiving, for lack of a better term. I see nuance much more clearly, and I can communicate and get along with people from a lot more backgrounds, not because I, am like some cosmopolitan world traveler who's seen everything, but because I can see where they're coming from when they're saying what they're saying, as opposed to just seeing everything in black and white. So you're in your early to mid 20s and kind of feeling like you're not on such stable ground. Maybe give one of these books a read on one of the subjects that you feel is most pertinent to you. Let me know in the comments below if there's a book on this list that you equally resonated with, or if there's a book I didn't mention that you found equally helpful. I'd love to hear from you guys. Love dialogue about tough topics like this. So yeah, appreciate your time today. Like, subscribe, and yeah, see you next time.